This is the Bryan Hyde Show.
Well, hello there, and welcome to the show. I trust you had a great Father's Day weekend. I'll tell you what, mine was above average. I do not deserve the love and affection that my family showered on me, but I do appreciate it. It was really kind, and you know, it kind of brings home something. I'm sorry, I'm going to dive right in here. Let's get deep into the philosophical pool right as we start the show today. But I'm helping to plan my 40-year high school reunion. It's less than a month away, and kind of excited for it. It's interesting. This year, I'm seeing a lot of reluctance on the part of former classmates. I don't know. I really don't want to come. Or I've come to them before, and it was still the same cliques as I experienced in high school, and I missed my 30-year reunion, so I don't know if that's the case or not. I know at the 20-year reunion, it seems like people had kind of, I don't know, we had found this equilibrium. Maybe it's because life had beat on us, and, you know, some of that pretense about status just wasn't as prevalent as, say, at the 10-year reunion. I distinctly remember going to the 10-year reunion and, you know, pulling up to the turf club, and first thing I see out there is somebody's bright red Porsche parked right out front. And I went, okay, we'll just get that right out there on the table first thing. You know, hey, everybody, look at me. Look how well I'm doing. But things had mellowed out by the time we hit the 20-year reunion, mainly because we have kids. And, you know, that's it was interesting. A lot of the students that I went to high school with, especially the ones who partied, somewhere between graduation and that 20-year reunion, there was a good number of them who finally hit that point of diminishing returns where the partying just didn't quite work for them. And by that, I mean there were many that were in recovery at that time, and to this day, they still are. Anyway, I missed out on the 30-year reunion. My understanding was it was even better in terms of barriers breaking down. I noticed at the 20-year reunion that, you know, well, I can't talk to you because you're part of this clique and I'm not. That kind of went away. And I actually made a point of speaking to more people than I had ever spoken to in high school. By the way, it's not because I was above them all. I wasn't. I was a nobody, and actually quite happy with that. Didn't draw a lot of attention, didn't raise people's expectations. It was a pretty safe place to ride out those years. But I genuinely regretted not having spoken to or associated with or at least made friends with many of those classmates. And I really, you know, as I would talk to them, I'd figure these are great people. They always were great people. But something about that silly status-driven mindset just kept us from really seeing each other for who we are. So I was sad. I regretted missing out on the 30-year reunion. That was tough. It sounded like it was a great opportunity. So when I was asked, could you help with the 40-year reunion? I'm like, yeah, I'd be glad to do that. And I'm just a little bit surprised to find that people are kind of, well, I don't know. I don't know if I really want to, you know, come around. And this is the part that kind of hits me. I'm actually feeling a little bit of an urgency. And I don't want to sound all doomsday. This may be the last reunion that we ever have a chance to attend. But I am looking around and I'm noticing that there's a lot fewer people, you know, still around. We started building out, you know, the memorial page of, you know, classmates who have passed on, and that number's getting noticeably larger. I imagine by our 50-year reunion, it's really going to be something. But sorry to wax a little bit nostalgic here. My point is simply this, though. It's really interesting to see how this all comes together, and part of the fun of bringing together, you know, people that you grew up with or went through that rite of passage of graduating high school with. You kind of want to know what have you done with your life, and not in a judgmental way, but just what's your story? What has your pathway been like? And so I was asked if I would be MC, and I agreed. Sure, I'd be happy to do it. Part of that duty was to come up with questions that we can ask of our classmates that could be fun. And I mean, there's some of these that are like, okay, who has the most kids? Who has had the most broken bones? Who's had the most traffic tickets or whatever? Who's written the most books? But I really found myself wanting to lean towards questions about what's the most meaningful thing that's happened in your life? And when I presented the list of suggested questions, to the rest of the committee, I was kind of surprised at the reaction, because they were kind of like, oh, I mean, not in a bad way, but like, oh, those are kind of tender, questions. Like, in other words, they're going a little bit beyond the superficial. But that was kind of the point. I don't want to know, so who's made the most money? By the way, some of them have done very well. But I want to know what happened in your life that you would consider really meaningful. And by the way, I pondered that question myself as I was celebrating Father's Day. And I think I'd have to put that up there at or near the top of the list. Being a dad has been one of the most meaningful things, that I've been able to participate in my life. And it's not that everything just was so smooth and we never had any problems. We never struggled, and my kids all turned out perfect. And, they're all doctors and astronauts. And nope. We've got a nice imperfect family. We struggle. My wife and I struggle. My kids struggle. Same struggles that most everybody has. But man, it's good to be with them. It's good to be with family. And I hope this doesn't come off as a flex. I know not everybody's situation is the same. There are outcomes that sometimes are just beyond our control. And I don't mean to intimate that, and those people who their family doesn't look like mine, somehow they're deficient. All I'm suggesting is, as I look back on my life and I look back on the things that really matter, it always seems to come back to family in some way, shape, or form. And I realize not every family looks exactly the same, and I'm not suggesting that they have to. But I am going to suggest that if you're trying to find peace, if you're trying to find meaning in your life, that is probably the most productive place to start looking for it. And there are a few people who, no, I didn't have time for kids. I was out there, I'm ready to make money, and I'm ready to, live the high life and travel the world and, whatever, their definition of success may be. And I hope they find happiness. Because sometimes it feels like family gets portrayed as this mundane existence of, you sure give up a lot when you have kids. And you know what? You do. But the second part of that is it's worth it. It's absolutely worth it. Okay, like I said, I'm sorry, I jumped right into the deep end of the pool right off the bat, but that's kind of been rattling around in my head over the weekend, and I just felt like I needed to get it off my chest. Now, if you are tired of getting hit between the eyes with bad news each day as you start the day, I would encourage you, please go to my show notes today. These are the show notes for June 17th, 2024. And the very first link that I provide for you in my show notes is a link to a website called Vera Verba. I don't understand what it means. I've not looked it up. I just know this is a sister site to Paul Rosenberg's Free Man's Perspective. And in true Paul Rosenberg fashion, this is a website that I think would be worth your while, especially if you're tired of getting hit with bad news as you start every day. Maybe it's time to start your day with some positive images. Healthy images. Paul says it's a massive waste of time and energy, not to mention seriously depressing, to turn on your computer in the morning and get slapped with the worst news that can be found. In fact, he just comes right out and says, that's a blow to your overall health. And so he says, veraverba.com, our sister site, is now an alternative. And what they do every single day is they post an image and a very brief explanation of good, noble, uplifting things. It's the right way for humans to begin their day. Now, this is not a for-profit kind of thing. They're not trying to get rich. They're not trying to collect your information. I'm going to give you a quick example here because these are so short. So here's one. A guy with a telescope set up. Come and see Saturn. On an appropriate evening, this gentleman carried his telescope and some signs to Walmart and offered people a chance to see the planet Saturn with their own eyes. To see something beyond the daily mayhem of this world, the loud, demanding images that refuse to be ignored, gives people a vision of something else and the possibility of something better. Paul says humans need distant stars to guide by. Without them, they can fixate on the negativity. They could see it as inescapable. In that condition, he says, progress tends to lock up. This man gifted people with a view to the outside. Now, there are many types of outside views, but of course he had this one to give, and he gave it. So for a few minutes before returning to the mundane, consider the things and the possibilities that lay outside of it. It'll almost certainly be time well spent. I'm not joking. If you really need a little quick pick-me-up, this website will do it for you. Might even inspire you to do some things of your own.
This is the Bryan Hyde Show. This is the Bryan Hyde Show.
All right, welcome back to the show. Let's see, I was trying to think if there's anything else really pressing. I got to tell you this. I have watched with some interest some of the goings-on in Washington, D.C., and I'm not terribly surprised by this development, but I had a number of people tweet or text or actually just send me this message over the weekend. Did you see where Congress in the National Defense Authorization Act that apparently they passed or voted on at the end of last week, they instituted something that will automatically register not just young men, but young women as well, between 18 and 26 for selective service. Now, this is a fancy way of saying they are laying the groundwork for a draft. And I don't want to go too far off the track here because I'm very passionate about opposition to a draft. And I understand there have been times, maybe there are even people within earshot. Well, you know, I had to register for it. My draft number came up, and I look at the draft as nothing more than a form of indentured servitude at best, or light slavery at worst. But I have to agree with my friend Connor Boyack, who I first of all applaud him for just being right out front and just saying, my son will not be cannon fodder for bloodthirsty warmongers. Should there ever be another draft, I will aid and abet him in dodging and resisting. Now, that, of course, has provoked a how cowardly, how, un-American of you. I don't think it's cowardly or un-American at all. And here's my thinking on this. If the government is actually representing our interests and doing its job, which is to protect our God-given rights, I don't think it would have any problem whatsoever if it was behaving in a legitimate fashion in raising help in a time of emergency to defend the country. I think people would do like they did in World War II, where they lied about their age to join. But I have to ask you, do you feel like we have that kind of representation today? I don't. In fact, I look, ultimately the choice is my kids get to make that choice. But I've also tried to persuade them that, you owe no loyalty to an entity that is doing its very best to imprison you, either figuratively or literally. There are things that are worth standing for and fighting for, and I believe there are things that actually are worth defending to the point of shedding blood. Life, liberty among them, freedom of conscience among them. But again, I don't see anybody, at least in the current power structure, standing for those things. And the idea that, we had to include this in the National Defense Authorization Act, hidden within it, by the way, another thing that was hidden within it, as in not explicitly stated, but, oh, look, here's this particular company with a $300 million allocation to it. And where does that $300 million go? Oh, that's to Ukraine. I just can't shake the feeling that somebody is trying to get us involved in a worldwide conflagration, and then they're going to demand that we send our children to fight it. So I want to just say kudos to Connor Boyack for just unequivocally stating, my son will not be cannon fodder for bloodthirsty warmongers. And if there ever is another draft, I will aid and abet him in dodging and resisting. By the way, I did like the tongue-in-cheek reply. Somebody said, oh, that's so selfish not to do your family's part to help America turn Kenya gay. You have to laugh, because otherwise, what's the alternative? Cry about it? All right. Let's move on to something a little more positive. I don't know if you are familiar with the show The Chosen, but my wife has been watching this lately, and I've caught myself, watching it as well. And it is some phenomenal storytelling. This is a dramatization of Jesus calling his disciples and the events of them founding his ministry. And I don't know that I have ever seen a more honest portrayal of people, like believable characters, flawed characters. I'll give you an example here. Judas, when he's called to be a disciple. I mean, he starts out really with very good intentions, but it's very clear that money is something that is a concern of his. There's a scarcity mindset. And he doesn't just come out, from the very beginning as, oh, yes, we knew from the very start that he was the evil one who would betray Christ. No, it's he was concerned about how can we make this ministry sustainable? How can we do this in such a way that we actually have the funds to go out and spread this gospel? And again, this is a dramatization, but it's just so well written and so well played. So I was a little bit encouraged when I saw the latest article from J.B. Shurk, published on AmericanThinker.com. And he talks about Christian faith, courage, and fatherhood. So let's touch on a couple of these. First of all, he writes about Dallas Jenkins' television series about Jesus and his disciples, The Chosen, is now in its 4th season. J.B. Shurk says, I continue to find the show a compelling historical and spiritual drama that I would highly recommend. In fact, he says, I believe that anyone who has played a role in its creation is responsible for saving countless lives. There can be no greater accomplishment. Now, he gives an example of what he's talking about. He talked about how the 4th season was streaming the other night, bringing us to the midpoint of Dallas Jenkins' envisioned 7 seasons. And by the way, do you realize almost all of the funding for this beautiful production comes from charitable donations? And before and after the live stream release of each episode, Jenkins provides context for what's portrayed and engages in meaningful conversation with cast and crew, and invites viewers to donate to their efforts should they be inspired to do so. You get what he's saying here? This isn't being bankrolled by, a bunch of Hollywood bigwigs. These are normal, average, everyday people who find value in it. During one such conversation, during episode 4, about an hour and 18 minutes into the live stream, Jenkins and a friend talk about an email from someone who has witnessed the show's life-saving impact. Now, the writer of the email is a therapist who was desperately trying to help a troubled patient. In this case, it was a recently divorced man struggling with addiction and thoughts of suicide. And in what sounded like a bit of last-ditch effort to reach the man, the therapist spoke about some of the important messages in The Chosen, and actually recommended that he watch an episode before their next session. And this therapist said his patient returned an entirely different man, shining almost. In their time apart, this man had binge-watched all of the seasons, joined a church, and began earnestly reading the Bible. And the thing is, the therapist explained, he was a devout atheist before this. But because of your work, he's changed his life around completely. You are saving lives through Jesus. Now, J.B. Shurk says, look, saving a single life is a remarkable achievement. As thousands of personal messages attest, the people behind The Chosen are saving lives every day. And in turn, many of those who are saved today will find themselves in a unique position to save others later in their lives. The exponential effect of rescuing one person continues long after we're gone. So what we choose to do with our lives reverberates through history. Now, this therapist's story reflects a common Christian predicament. We've been told all our lives, keep your religious convictions to yourselves. Government agents punish us for praying in the classroom or even near the town square. Corporate actors scold us for sharing the Bible with a colleague or with friends during a break from work. Professional organizations often forbid the expression of Christian faith. In effect, those who follow Jesus have been instructed to keep the most important lessons of our lives a complete secret. Imagine how many people who could have been saved never were saved because of these harmful social rules. And he says, now consider the exponential loss that humanity has suffered and will continue to suffer well into the future. Okay, I got to tap the brakes here because we're coming up on our own break. We'll come back to this article in a few moments. But again, I'm going to ask you, if you haven't seen The Chosen, consider taking in an episode and just see if it offers you a nice break from the usual woke garbage that Hollywood is putting out.
This is the Bryan Hyde Show. This is the Bryan Hyde Show.
Hey, welcome back to the show. Again, I'm sharing this article from J.B. Shurk from AmericanThinker.com. You'll find a link in my show notes at thebryanhydeshow.com. Show notes for June 17th, 2024. Boy, oh boy, is this month going quickly. So I want to come back to Shurk's commentary. He had talked about this therapist encouraging a patient to watch The Chosen and how the person came away changed by what he encountered. And that's not to suggest why this show could just solve all of the world's problems, but I think more importantly, the show points the viewer in the direction of the one person, the one being that really can solve the world's problems. So we shouldn't act too surprised when something like that happens. And here we are faced with this predicament of, well, all of our lives, most of us have been told you keep those religious convictions to yourself. That's private. That's the information that you need to just keep to yourself. In the meantime, let's go to the gay pride parade and wave around the flags and the sex toys and whatever. But yeah, the values have all been kind of inverted. Now, J.B. Shurk says, a Christian who meets a suicidal atheist knows how to help, but how often do we hide the answer from those who suffer in order to avoid contravening secular society's prohibition against public expressions of faith? He says, when we stay silent, we bury truth in darkness. Then when we bemoan the darkness of our society, we often forget that we chose to hide the light. How have we reached a moment in history when burning a Bible or an American flag is constitutionally protected free speech, but burning a gay pride flag is punished as a hate crime, or for that matter, driving over it or leaving tire marks on it, right? How can Antifa rioters graffiti and topple historic statues without fear of arrest while teenagers are hunted down for leaving tire marks on rainbow-painted street intersections? It's a good point. How can state governments religiously discriminate against Christians and ban Christian parents from foster care programs? How is it possible that a D.C. judge could mock an elderly pro-life defendant before sentencing her to 2 years behind bars for the crime of praying? I mean, this woman is in her 80s who's being sentenced. And her husband was testifying before the judge saying, I'm very worried about her life. To which the judge mockingly said, well, she should do her best to stay alive. After all, that's a tenet of her religion, isn't it? Wow. Dang. Well, J.B. Shurk says, we are here as witnesses to these iniquities because Christians throughout the West have been told to be quiet and too many obeyed. An immoral law is no law at all. Immoral authorities are authorities on nothing. When good retreats, evil advances. Defending what's right cannot be done in silence. He says a recent statistical survey from the United Kingdom suggests that around 40% of Christians hide their faith from others. Now, that might not sound too surprising in our current secular age, but it should bother us nonetheless. If the UK study is loosely representative of the broader West, it means that roughly half of the Christian population lurks in the shadows. Tens of millions of Christians pretend not to know what they know. They fail to pass Christ's teachings to others. They discuss important public policies without the explicit guidance of their faith. And when so many Christians self-censor, is it any surprise that society has descended into a state of spiritual confusion and moral decay? There's only one way out of the darkness, and that is Christians must be bold and brave. Men in particular, he says, must become stronger defenders of their faith. It is no coincidence that those who work to destroy society routinely attack Christianity and masculinity. Both are threats to a communist state. A Christian stands against any government that insists on usurping God. A man stands against any government that threatens his family. An unyielding and courageous Christian man then is a ferocious enemy to Marxist globalism. Consequently, Christian nationalism and the dreaded patriarchy are two of the propaganda media's most targeted bugaboos. He says there's a rhetorical war right now on familial and spiritual fatherhood. Men are told that they have no right to object to abortion. They're told that physical displays of chivalry are outdated and toxic. They are told to shut up, sit down, and get out of the way. Television commercials and shows routinely portray men as clumsy, ignorant, and misguided. Movies pretend that families are better off without fathers. Celebrities fantasize about a world without men. Likewise, priests and Christian pastors, are almost always depicted as being perverts, pedophiles, secret racists, fascists, and white supremacists. Men of God are rarely presented as self-sacrificing souls who would do anything to save their parishioners. Instead, political pundits and entertainers slander them as disingenuous grifters and sinful hypocrites. Followers of Christ are denounced as rubes, imperialists, and spreaders of hate. Well, judging from their vicious attacks, he says, it seems that leftists fear nothing more than dependable fathers, committed families, and uncompromising Christian faith. Those of you who grew up with attentive, loving fathers know why that is. Fathers teach boys how to be honorable men, and they teach girls what qualities are best in a future husband. Good, strong, morally upright men can only be pushed so far before they begin pushing back. They will endure insult and injury for the benefit of their loved ones until the threats to their families become too great to ignore. Then, with full hearts and humble prayers, they will do what must be done to save their children. J.B. Shurk asks, can you imagine how terrifying it must be for those who believe in nothing but their own importance to see real men who are willing to sacrifice themselves for their families and who bow before no one besides Almighty God? A Christian man filled with righteous anger and spurred into purposeful action is a force to be reckoned with. No wonder Christianity and masculinity are under constant attack. Father's Day is a good time to remember the brave and faithful men who will be needed to steady society's rocking ship and steer it forward. As The Chosen reminds viewers time and again, only by standing fearlessly can we teach others to do the same. He says our Heavenly Father tells us to be courageous. When we are, we save those who follow. Now, this may strike you as kind of a, it's a very faith-based message, but I think I tend to agree with J.B. Shurk. We've put our light under a bushel. We've hidden it out of fear of, I don't want to be, pushing my religion on people. I don't want to push religion on people, but I definitely want to be a source of illumination. Not because I'm all that, but because I believe that the illumination that we all need to look toward is there to help everybody. But sometimes it's not so easy. So here's what I'm going to encourage you to do is just look for those opportunities to lift people around you. You don't have to, start playing a hymn for them or otherwise, get them cornered. Okay, we're going to, have a little sermon right now. It's more a matter of what are you doing by example that is promoting peace, that is promoting the value of the human soul. It doesn't have to be something grand. Sometimes it's just an encouraging word. Sometimes it's just reaching out to someone and asking how they're doing. I've said this before, and I believe this so strongly. There is no greater evidence of God's love for each individual person than to have the kind of friends who hear when God whispers your name in their ears. In other words, when you're struggling and someone calls from out of the blue and says, hey, I've been thinking about you today and I just can't get you off my mind. Everything okay? That's an example of what I'm talking about. And I would encourage people, be that kind of friend. You'll be shocked and you'll be humbled when you find out that something that you acted on, an impression that you acted on, turns out to have been something that someone else really needed, when you were an answer to their prayer. And it's extremely humbling and it's profoundly reassuring when it happens to you. So don't pass up those opportunities. Look, there are people out there who are looking to be offended. You don't have to go out of your way to make them miserable. Otherwise, just to find them and rub it in their nose. Ha ha, I'm religious. You can't stop me. But there's something very powerful about the example of a person who is well rooted in their faith to the point that they have confidence that they don't have to hide their light. And that doesn't mean that they're walking around holier than thou. They can show, by power of example, what they believe in such a way that it actually improves the lives of people around them and helps them find direction. And right now, I can tell you, there are a lot of people looking for direction. And they're looking about for people who, seem to have some kind of peace about them. So here's your challenge. Be that person. Be the person who has the kind of peace and confidence that others can look at you and say, how can you be so calm? The world is falling apart. It's crumbling around us. Everything that we thought we could count on turns out to be corrupted or otherwise fallible. What a blessing to be able to have the kind of confidence that others would look to you. All right, on that note, we'll take a quick break. When we come back, got some more great stuff to share, just the other side of these messages.
This is the Bryan Hyde Show. This is the Bryan Hyde Show.
All right, welcome back. This is our final segment today. So as much as I prefer to avoid politics, I do have to share a couple of articles with you that are less about politics and more about why you are on your own when it comes to finding and ascertaining what is true and what isn't. The media will lie to us about pretty much literally anything. And I've got a great article here from Quilt the Raven, about why nothing is off limits for the media, meaning they can lie about just about anything. So here's a non-controversial statement. Joe Biden is unfit to be president of the United States. Democrats know it, Republicans know it, people in the media know it, other world leaders know it, you know it, and I know it. So putting aside your partisan biases for a moment, think of the endless deluge of clips where the current president of the United States trails off while talking, mumbles incoherently, loses his frame of reference, shakes hands with nobody, trips and falls asleep, or stares off into outer space during other important international gatherings. Now, QTR says, look, I know this isn't just a case of my lying eyes or simply taking clips out of context, because friends of mine who lean left also notice it and tell me they wish the Democrats would run another candidate. Well, last week a clip surfaced where Joe Biden, in the midst of a meeting with Italy's Giorgia Meloni and other world leaders at the G7 summit, wanders off from the group of leaders and needs to be directed back to where to stand by Meloni, who assists him. One ally at the summit reportedly said about Biden, "It's the worst he has ever been." This follows another clip that surfaced last week of Biden alongside Vice President Kamala Harris with her husband, some dude in a dress and a crowd full of people dancing to gospel music at the White House. As the room claps along, dances, and sways to Kirk Franklin, Biden rigidly sways for a couple of seconds, then appears frozen, staring straight ahead, paralyzed, like the first time I took a whole 10-milligram THC edible. Now, these are just the latest two incidences in a bizarre series of gaffes over the last 4 years for Biden. And while Democrats in my life at least have the decency and presence of mind to realize they would sound idiotic trying to make the argument that Biden is still sharp, the media has no such finesse and no such decency. In fact, last week, multiple left-wing commentators took to MSNBC to make the argument that the video clip of Biden wandering off from Giorgia Meloni was nothing more than a classic case of misinformation. They argued it was disinformation. Stop me if you've heard that one before. The evidence that Biden appears lost is right in front of their face. Yet with a straight face, they tell viewers that the clip is being taken out of context. The next day, the media was still at it, turning their attention to why Trump is not well and fit for office and acting as though Biden's mental faculties are rock solid and time-tested. To quote Will Smith in Men in Black, what you think you saw, you did not see. But QTR says as a strategy for Democrats, lying has been extremely effective. It's helped them sidestep consequences from the inconvenient facts that we were lied to about vaccines and mandates. We were likely lied to about the origin of the coronavirus. We were lied to about the United States' role in gain-of-function research. We were lied to about Joe Biden's involvement in his son's international business dealings. We were lied to about peaceful, in quotes, protests that saw unconscionable private property damage post-George Floyd. We have been lied to about the jobs numbers. We've been lied to about inflation being at 9% when Joe Biden took office. And we were lied to and subsequently censored about Hunter Biden's laptop just 1 month before the pivotal 2020 election. Then, 51 former intelligence officials went full harakiri with their credibility by vouching for the false Russian disinformation story we were being fed about the laptop. Quite the effort, no? QTR says these are just the examples I can rattle off from the top of my head. But together, they make up a compendium of vitally crucial issues in the recent history of our country that have no doubt played a material role in our elections. And he says, as I admit, on both sides of the aisle, lying has always been synonymous with politics. For as long as I've been alive, people have been saying politicians lie, and they haven't been wrong. But something has changed. As he recently talked about with his friend Chris Martenson on Peak Prosperity, the advent of alternative digital media and the ease with which individuals can now conduct research and fact-check things for themselves is far greater than it ever has been. It only takes some critical thinking, or in the case of trying to figure out whether Joe Biden is lucid, a quick 2-second interval of simply opening your eyes on Twitter or YouTube to determine whether or not you're being lied to now. QTR says, what I said to Chris in our interview was that in the old days, a lie could solidify itself globally, and it could be 15 to 20 years before the lying party offers a limited hangout that suggests to the public that something may not have been truthful in years past. Nowadays, with the alternative media and the internet, that window between telling the lie and the public beginning to unearth the objective truth has slammed shut. Back in the day, if you had a Gulf of Tonkin incident or Operation Northwoods or whatever, it would be 10 years later, there would be a limited hangout. 15 years later, there would be a little bit more, and 20 years later, it would kind of homogenized itself in the zeitgeist of everything, and everybody one day just kind of walks around and accepts the fact, well, the Gulf of Tonkin was made up. But now, the internet has sped that process up, and alternative media has sped that up. So from 2020, that check has come due right now. You know that Hunter Biden lies, that the check has come due now. The ivermectin lies, that check has come due now. And QTR says, I know this because Democrats are now witnessing the consequences of the lies they told just over the last 4 years. There's no way to avoid the fact that the Democratic Party is in shambles right now. Democrats are bleeding crucial demographics they otherwise would have normally been expected to carry with ease. The reasoning for this? Their lack of finesse in executing their political strategy and the speed with which people are able to discern that they are being lied to. A better way to say this, people are simply finally waking up. What has been fascinating to watch is the party's inability to read the room, now replete with people who are unamused by their detachment from truth and reality. QTR says, I argued last week that some mindfulness and humility would do the Democratic Party some good, maybe even win it some respect from the likes of people like myself or other centrists and libertarians. But based on MSNBC parading obvious lies about Joe Biden's mental acuity last week and continuing to try to blame the everyday citizen for not being smart enough to understand what it is they're looking at, it seems like the party simply remains on a hamster wheel of self-destruction. Hopefully they'll learn the hard way during election season, similar to what we saw in Europe last week. But as a simple observer and concerned citizen, QTR says it's a great time for all of us to be reminded that no part of the left seems to be conceding reality or adapting their political strategy, which means the key lesson to keep in mind heading into November is that no matter how sensational the headline or how concerned they tell us we should be about an issue, the most important thing to remember we can and will be lied to about anything and everything. Boy, that's some gospel truth right there. Again, I've got a link to this article in my show notes. I hope you'll check it out. There's also an article that follows this up. This is from a Substack called Armageddon Prose. And the Biden construct exhorts spineless press corps to play by the rules. I don't know if you were aware of this, but Biden has to have some pretty carefully scripted things put in front of him. And apparently a reporter during a press conference at the G7 summit in Italy asked a question about the Hamas-Israel ceasefire. And Biden responded, "I wish you guys would play by the rules a little bit. I'm here to talk about a critical situation in Ukraine, and you asked me about another subject." Okay, does that sound like something a guy with good mental acuity would be complaining about? And, of course, the press corps has come out, well, we don't accept any kind of limitations on what questions we should ask, but they do. You know that if you don't play the bill or play the game, you're going to be, persona non grata as far as the press corps. Politicians always have been and always will be, with very few exceptions, Ron Paul being one of those exceptions, a finger in the wind sleazeball willing to do or say whatever they think will advance their personal interests, fame, money, invitations to cocktail parties, and so forth. And the only meaningful check on the politician's avarice and the machinery of state that he represents is popular will backed up ultimately by force if necessary. And in order for the citizenry to stay apprised of what the government is doing to it and in its name, a free press has to tell the truth about what it's up to. That is not something that our press corps seems interested in doing at this point. One final article that I would like to direct your attention to, because we are flat up against the clock here. It's easy to feel like we're living more and more in an open-air insane asylum. Donald Jeffries has an excellent, albeit kind of lengthy article about staying sane in the land of lunatics. He makes a pretty strong case that, we did away with lunatic asylums some time ago. And for good reason. There was abuse that was taking place. But look around at the unreality that everyone is expected to unquestioningly acknowledge and obey and bend the knee to. He says maybe it's time to bring back those asylums for everybody's mental health.
This is the Bryan Hyde Show.